I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me now is Clifford Winston, a senior fellow of economic studies at the Brookings Institution. Clifford, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, the economy has been the top issue facing voters headed into this election, and we do have a bit of insight into both of the top candidates' economic agenda. Vice President Kamala Harris did unleash a proposal of what she would do with the economy. I know she's only been in the race for about a month, but here are some of her points. She's going to implement a federal ban on price gouging for food and groceries, provide $25,000 for down payment for first-time homeowners, get rid of taxes on tips, give families a child tax credit, cap prescription drug prices, invest in a $40 billion innovation fund with the purpose of finding rental and housing solutions, and restore middle-class tax cuts. When you hear some of those proposals, as an economist, what do you think?
All right. Well, I think maybe a different type of economist than you talk to on these shows. I like to take things slow, and that is start with a framework, right? And ask something that people rarely ask. What are the goals? What are you trying to do? Before sort of jumping into policies and saying, oh, this one's a good policy, this one's a bad policy, step back and ask yourself, what are the objectives? Okay. So if I can, let me just sketch a framework on how to think about policies and then apply it. All right. Because then I think things will follow in a logical way. Okay. So usually there are sort of two broad reasons why government intervenes in the economy and offers policy. One is to correct what we call market failures. There's some kind of inefficiency out there, monopoly, externalities, things of that nature, that the government wants to step in and correct because the market isn't doing it. Two, there are social goals. That is, markets aren't inefficient, but there are outcomes, allocations that they don't like. That is, markets may be paying people their, quote, appropriate wage, but the wages are still too low. And they want to enable these people to have a reasonable standard of living and give them more money. All right, so those are the two things. Then the question is, what are the policy tools? One policy tool is regulation, and the other policy tool is spending. Then the hard question, okay, what's the most efficient thing to do? That can then bring in the market. And the answer might be, look, stay out. Government shouldn't intervene. Just let the market sort this out. Or if the government does have a policy, then you ask a hard question. Is this the most efficient policy for the government to pursue? There might be room for government, but the way it's doing it isn't efficient. It's wasting resources. Okay? So that's the setup. Then we can now sort of talk about specific policy. So just as an example, we hear the term price gouging. Well, it's a little difficult for me to understand that because the economists tend not to use that term, but you hear discussions about it in the context of prices are too high, then there's some relationship to inflation, things of that nature you hear. Well, if the issue is inflation, then that's not a micro policy issue. It's a macro policy issue. So the first thing to point out then is if you're really worried about inflation, you need to have the right tool, and that tends to be macroeconomic policy, interest rates, for example. All right. So discussions about inflation usually say we want higher interest rates, slow things down, and cut price levels and slow down the economy. I don't think anyone wants to be doing that. They're talking about reducing interest rates. So it's hard to see, current discussions particularly relevant to inflation. Now, if you say, well, what we don't like about this is there's monopoly or collusion or some kind of anti-competitive behavior. All right, it'd be nice if there was some evidence, but even without that, the usual tool is antitrust policy. The government usually doesn't come in on markets and say, okay, we at the federal level are going to decide to do this without any antitrust investigation. All right. So, that's the kind of spirit in which I see a lot of these policies. It's not clear half the time what they're trying to do, and it's not clear, what tool, they're using, and is it the appropriate one. Now, to be fair, this has just been launched within a few weeks, and I think it's unreasonable really to look at Kamala Harris and say, well, she should have a well-crafted policy. A month ago, I think she wasn't thinking about even doing this. On the other hand, there is quite a lot of evidence about Donald Trump's micro policies because he actually went through this as president. And there we can analyze very specific things that he did and what we tend to think about his policies. And pretty much, I think it's fair to say that he ran the table on inefficient policies. Every one of them were not the kinds of things either that we should be doing, or if they were, we could be doing them a lot better. So if you're looking for a comparison, I think the track record of Trump is not good. Harris, I think, needs a bit more thought about what's going on. But obviously, what she's saying now and what she's going to do when she gets elected could be two very different things.